Welcome to this, the latest in the Travel Weekly Roadmap to Recovery series of webcasts. I'm Ian Taylor, and I'm joined today by Mark Tanzer, Chief Executive of Abta. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
What do you make of the government's COVID travel list? And what do you make of the lifting of restrictions that this entails?
It's a very welcome step forward into I hope the recovery phase for the industry. No doubt about that. I have been in close discussion with the various departments to encourage them to move away from a blanket approach to both quarantine and foreign office advice, and to take more of a risk-based approach, which is what they seem to be doing in selecting countries and rejecting other countries. That's welcome. I think it's the only way that this can be managed in the medium term. So it's very positive.
And you're confident the Foreign Office advice will change in line, presumably, with the lifting?
I understand it will. I don't know whether it will be exactly in line, but I think the lifting of the blanket advisory against all but essential travel is imminent.
Okay. And what do you make of the process, that led up to the lifting of the restrictions? It's been fairly tortuous, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's, the normal thing to do in this situation is to criticise the government. It's a very difficult job they've got on this, let's be honest. And I think the way quarantine was introduced wasn't ideal in terms of the way it was explained, people understanding it. And it was a blanket approach, but if you haven't got the ability to gather data in place, then I can see why that was perhaps the first step. And I imagine that behind the scenes, there's been a lot of work going on, measuring countries on not just their infection rate, but what kind of public health facilities they've got if people get ill there and so forth. So it's probably quite a complicated calculation to decide whether or not a country meets the criteria. And of course, the data are moving. As we see with infection rates here, they can move quite significantly from week to week. So I have a certain sympathy with the government in the challenges they face in coming up with a definitive list. But we are really, really anxious now to get hold of that and to see the market open up.
Okay. How damaging do you think the whole quarantine imposition and the controversy around it will have been to consumer confidence? Do you think that assuming people can travel from July the 10th to the sort of destinations we're hearing about, that the impact will not have been as great as some people feared, or do you think the damage has been done?
Well, I think, a bigger impediment has been the blanket Foreign Office advice against all but essential travel, to be honest. I think if that hadn't been in place, then the impact of quarantine would have been greater. But as long as that blanket advisory has been in place, it probably hasn't had as big an impact, quarantine. I think there is an issue of consumer confidence. I don't think it's just to do with quarantine. I think it is wariness about travel within the United Kingdom, let alone overseas. And I think the travel industry needs to recognise that. We are supporting members in terms of information about the countries. We've got country recovery guides where all the current information is. We've published a post-pandemic guide for members as to how they can make sure that the customer experience in destination is as positive and as safe as possible. So I think all of those steps will help rebuild customer confidence and get them ready to book.
Okay, but what about what happens at the other end now? People could travel to Greece from July the 10th, not fearing a quarantine on their return here, but they could be quarantined on arrival in Greece for the first few days after the restrictions are lifted here. New Zealand they could travel to, but they will definitely go into quarantine if they go to New Zealand. And there's several other destinations that would apply to. So how is the industry going to address those restrictions?
Well, we have just putting a page up on our website on restarting travel for customers, saying look at the Foreign Office advice, make sure you keep updated with the Foreign Office advice, and of course talk to a professional travel organizer because they're going to have the most up-to-date information. This is going to be to a certain degree, a moving target. And if our infection rates go up, then you could see countries putting in restrictions on us. So I think the urgency for us to follow public health advice here, all the hand sanitation, masks, distancing is really important for the travel industry, actually, because if our rate of infection goes up, you'll see other countries reacting against it.
Okay. There's obviously going to be all sorts of confusion and uncertainty. That's potentially an opportunity for those in the trade, I suppose. But it also raises all sorts of issues, doesn't it? If consumers want to cancel because there's uncertainty and so on. So what will Abta be recommending to members, for example, if a consumer says, well, I know the flights are available, I know the destination's open without restrictions, but I don't want to go, I don't want to risk it?
Well, I mean, nobody can force a customer to go. If you don't want to go, that's fine. I think the rules that we've always followed, if the if the holiday can be delivered and the the flights are going and the hotel is there and the holiday experience is as advertised, then that doesn't give rise to a cancellation right. Now, there may be some instances where if you are going for a particular experience at a theme park and the theme park is shut, you can say, well, I can't deliver that holiday and therefore I will have a right to a cancellation. So I think it's on a case-by-case basis, but I don't think there's no general cancellation right for people's disinclination to travel. I think individuals will have to inform themselves properly using travel organisers and make informed decisions about when they want to travel.
But presumably, if there are quarantine self-isolation restrictions in place at the destination for UK arrivals, that would be good enough grounds for consumers to cancel or postpone travel.
I don't think you can generalise it, and it depends whether people know about that at the time they book. And I think it's very difficult to say, a quarantine restriction gives you a right to cancellation. If it depends, and I don't think you can generalise and say that's an automatic right. And it's a changing picture, so I think it's very difficult to have a hard and fast rule about this.
Okay, and if a holiday is as advertised, that could be subject to debate in the current circumstances, couldn't it? If one travels to a destination and not all the restaurants are open, not the bars are open, the entertainment isn't as it would have been in previous summers, and so on. So how will the question of whether the holiday is as advertised be interpreted, would you say?
Well, I think there will be specific instances, as I just said, where the entire purpose of the holiday was around one feature. If that feature is shut, then you can say, well, that was the holiday. If it is a general, I traveled to a particular country and certain facilities weren't available because of this, I think then that doesn't give rise to that, because there are other things that one can do in that country. Each, as I say, individual cases are different. Customers will talk to their travel providers and they'll have that discussion as to whether it is a meaningful change to what they booked.
Okay. And what about the risks of travellers falling sick while they're away from COVID, obviously, or having to go into lockdown because there's a spike in the destination, or having to quarantine on their return to the UK anyway because there was a spike in the resort and so on. And consumers then say, well, my travel agent or my tour operator told me it was okay to go. What will happen in those sorts of situations? Because they're inevitable, aren't they?
I don't know, they're different in nature to the situation that we've always had where people may fall ill when they're overseas. I think the advice to have good travel insurance, and there are travel insurance policies travel coming back to the market now that will cover for people falling sick overseas, even from COVID related illnesses. Obviously there are reciprocal healthcare arrangements in place at present with the EU, and we hope to replace those going forward. So I think there are safeguards that people can put in place to protect them from that. I don't think it's a different situation that's unique to COVID.
Okay. You sound broadly optimistic about how things are going to pan out. Is that fair?
Well, I am optimistic that we're heading in the right direction. I mean, so much of this will depend on the trajectory of the disease. if whether both here and overseas, and no one can predict that, whether it spikes, second waves, however you wish to describe it. It's a very uncertain future, and no one. You look at the USA, you see countries where COVID had died down and it comes back, and I think that will naturally create some nervousness for the travel industry. And if you talk anecdotally to companies within Abta membership about how they see the recovery timetable, I think that's probably the biggest uncertainty out there, is what trajectory the COVID will take, and then of course you have to rebuild customer confidence alongside that. So I am optimistic. I don't think it will be a rapid bounce back to pre-COVID levels, but I think it will gradually come back to where we were.
Okay. Will Abta be producing any marketing messages or anything?
Yes, well, we will. I mean, certainly on the back of this, what we hope will be the announcement about the opening of travel through the lifting of quarantine and Foreign Office advice, will be encouraging customers to get properly informed, book with Abta members, and start traveling again. There does seem to be, from what you read in the press, and a lot of pent-up demand for travel. And you saw in the UK when we had some good weather how people were desperate to get out. So I think the demand is still there. As I say, there are issues around information and overcoming any nervousness customers have that we have to manage. But if we can keep the channels, the travel corridors open, then we can have a summer season, which is really, really important.
Okay. What do you say to the criticism there's been of those representing to the industry, to government, specifically Abta, but not just Abta? Paul Charles, who's been working on behalf of the Quash Quarantine coalition of businesses, said that the industry should never have been faced with this situation. Really, it should have been nipped in the bud by those who, sit around the table with government. Is that fair criticism?
No, I don't think that is fair. I think the workings of government, even within across departments, are not always transparent and open, and everyone can participate. I think we didn't join the Quash Quarantine campaign. Don't think it was the right thing to do. Understood the spirit of it and the urgency of getting quarantine changed, but it's very difficult if the industry takes a point of view on a health issue against government advice, because it is seen to be putting the interests of commercial interests ahead of the safety of customers. That's point one. Secondly, I think to go out very aggressively against a government policy they just put in place can sometimes be counterproductive, because the government can say, well, we can't lose face, so we'll just stick with it. Whereas what we have been doing is talking to the relevant secretaries of state and impressing on them, the urgency, but also the need for a risk-based approach. And we've arrived at a place that whether together with Quash Quarantine or separately, is the right place to be. So sometimes it's good to have a public campaign, as we did with Save Future Travel, to raise the importance of the issue of refunds with MPs. But sometimes it's better to work behind the scenes directly with the officials and with the ministers.
Well, was it helpful to have a public campaign like Quash Quarantine on the one hand, while continuing to talk behind the scenes with government officials?
I think the government ministers I was speaking to were very well aware of the urgency before the Quash Quarantine campaign. The balancing of health risk against economic risk is the big dilemma of the moment, and you go too far one side or too far the other, and you end up with a problem. So I think they're completely aware of that. I'm not sure that the Quash Quarantine campaign particularly shed any light on it. It may have added a bit more kind of fuel to the flame, but what was needed was cool thinking by Department of Transport, which I think they've brought to it, and I think they've done a good job.
So would it be fair to say it was more heat than light, really, from the public campaign?
In my view, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Are there lessons nonetheless to take from the whole process? I mean, I heard Clive Ratton, who heads the Business Travel Association, and say this is a very inexperienced government learning as they go, and that had led to, some of the confusion about the process and and so on.
I think, as I said, the quarantine decision wasn't communicated very well. I think that is a lesson that can be learned. I don't think it helped with the implementation of it, but the fact that it came very suddenly without consultation and understanding. I hope if there are lessons to be learned, there can be some there that, engagement at an early stage with the industry is much better for both sides than policy decisions that are dropped out of the clear blue sky.
Yeah. And there's obviously going to be a whole number of destinations, important destinations like the US, left off the COVID travel list for the time being. Are you hopeful that the process of expanding the list will work more smoothly as we move forward now?
Yes, I think so. I think as I said, I think it's quite a complicated equation to decide whether a country is like green or amber or red. Having been through that, presumably many, many times through these countries, it should be a well-established process now. And I think countries will, I hope, come onto the green list. And equally, countries could move off it if their infection rates go up. I think this is part of the way we're going to have to manage international travel over the coming months until COVID moves off the scene. So the sooner we have the tools and the sort of analytical capability in place, the better.
Okay. And do you have any concerns about the amber category? Because, if a destination moves from green to amber, okay, that's beneficial because it stops it moving into red, but it could also be interpreted as, oh, there's a growing risk in a destination. It might change to red while I'm away, kind of thing. Do you see the amber category as possibly not helping consumer confidence?
Well, Foreign Office advice will never, they're always very, they never say anywhere is safe. Everywhere has risks attached to it. And I think this gives you, the customer a sort of graded way of assessing that. The best way to, if you are concerned, is to take your own personal safety precautions in distancing and masks and so forth. And I think those options are always available to people. If it moves into the red category, when clearly the government has a considerable concern about the health situation, then that is a clear statement to customers about not travelling to that place for holidays.
Okay, good. Well, look, hopefully we can leave quarantine behind by the end of next week. Sorry to bring up another chestnut, though. We're still waiting to hear more on refund credit notes, aren't we? Are they protected against insolvency, as Abta has been saying all along? Are you still hoping, expecting we'll have confirmation of that from the CAA, DFT, that refund credit notes are protected against failure?
Well, we would welcome that. I think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding in the telling of this. I mean, a refund credit note is evidence of an ATOL booking, which is already protected under the rules of the ATOL scheme. That's what it is. It's not a separate thing. It is evidence of a protected booking, and it is quite clear from the ATOL, from payment policy, that a deferred refund, if a company fails, is still payable. So we have never been in doubt that these arrangements are protected by ATOL in the same way that if they're Abta arrangements, they're protected by us. And I think, the uptake of refund credit notes has been strong, and I think people understand that they are backed by the ATOL scheme and by us. It'd be very nice if the CAA came out, or the DFT, and said that explicitly, but we're confident that from our own reading of their payment policy that is the case.
There will be a lot of refund credit notes that were issued with an expiry date of July the 1st. So that's just up now, and presumably within 14 days of that expiry date, you'll be expecting those companies that issued those refund credit notes to refund cash to consumers, unless the consumers are happy to roll the booking over. Is that what you're expecting to see,
I don't,
consumers with being
yeah,
refunded now?
I don't know what the volume of those July dated refund credit notes is, Ian, because that would have been very early on. You know, we were already into bond renewals by the time this really bit in March, and so people would have been able to issue longer dated refund credit notes. But yes, you know, the idea of refund credit note is that at its expiry, you are entitled to a cash refund.
Yeah.
And if that is a July date, then that is the case, unless, of course, they agree with the customer to roll it forward, or, you know, for a rebooking or whatever. There may be individual discussions that go on, but that is the principle of the refund credit note.
Sure. Okay. Abta stuck its neck out on refund credit notes, and has come in for quite a lot of criticism from various sources on that. It's obviously been very important for the industry. You've no regrets on the stance Abta took on that, presumably.
Well, I regret that we had to take a stand in the way that we did, because obviously we'd like customers to, you know, been able to get their money back, but the circumstances prohibited that. And I think what we came up with, which was a way of bringing order to that situation and protection and giving customers confidence that they wouldn't be left high and dry, was the right thing to do. So I don't regret what we did. But obviously, I regret a situation such as COVID where we had the necessity to do it. I think, as I said, the uptake of refund credit notes has been very strong, you know, up to 80% with some of our members. It shows the kind of loyalty customers have and the understanding of the situation. So I think they have served a very valuable purpose. I think there were, you know, one or two, you know, very vocal critics and clearly customers who were angry because they wanted their money back. But I think if you look at it in the round, it was the right thing for certainly for the industry and also actually for the customers, because companies failing would have meant many, many months before they got their money back. So I don't regret the step we took.
Given that we're poised to see a restart of travel, albeit not to a lot of long haul destinations, do you think the fear of failures has diminished for Abta members, or do you think the you know, the possibilities of failure are as strong as ever? Are we entering
Well, let's
you
not,
know, a difficult period now for businesses?
oh, I think we're still in a critical period. You know, we still, you know, the government furlough scheme, which, you know, we argued strongly for, is there, but is due to come to an end in you know, tapering off from August. I think without that, companies would have had severe problems. And you know, as we speak at the moment, you know, the Foreign Office travel advice hasn't changed, so there's no new money coming in. So I think it is still a very challenging period. I think if we can get a meaningful summer season in the second half of July, August, September, then obviously that will help enormously companies to build up their cash reserves and pay, you know, obviously pay refunds, but also give them what they need to get through the winter.
And how would you define a meaningful summer season now?
Well, you know, it's hard to do percentages on year, but I think you look at the, as I say, the pent-up demand that I think is there, and if we can get people travelling again in any degree at all, that would be very, very welcome to get the cash flow coming in.
Okay, I was looking at a survey by BVA BDRC. They do a weekly tracker on consumer sentiment, including on travel, and their latest forecast as of the week before last was, it's researched on the week before last, was that about 24%, 23% of people intended to take an overseas holiday by by the end of the year. So that would be, considerably down year on year, but maybe not too bad given where we've been the last 4 months. But if if that sort of proportion of consumers, maybe half the proportion who normally take at least one overseas trip in a year, were to take a holiday now this year, would that be enough to tide most businesses over, would you think? Obviously, it'll depend on their business mix and so on.
Yeah, it's very hard to generalize. What I would say is that just about every Abta member I know has done everything it can to button down the hatches in terms of cash going out, and made some very difficult decisions about redundancies and so forth to make themselves as lean as possible through these coming months. So that will very sad steps they've had to take, but that actually is very important to help. So with that, plus, as I say, even that level of business coming in, it certainly improves the situation.
And how do you assess the situation with redundancies and maybe prospective redundancies as we go into the autumn and more people come off furlough? In corporate travel, Clive Ratton of the BTA has said they estimate 1 in 2 jobs will go. The sector's likely to come back later than leisure travel. The airlines are cutting 15 to 30% of employees across the board. So what do you think the situation is in the leisure sector?
I think it clearly depends on what happens over the summer months and how quickly the market comes back. I think I have written to the Chancellor ahead of his fiscal statement, which we anticipate next week, arguing that we, on a sector by sector basis, there needs to be an extension of the furlough arrangements, salary support arrangements. Just because I think the travel sector was the first to be hit, and it may be one of the last to come out of it in terms of customer confidence, business travel, and so forth. And we want the industry to be there to help the recovery, not just to help the companies. And I would argue for a continuation of some kind of salary support scheme or grant scheme to help companies through that, which would reduce the need for redundancies. The problem with redundancies is not just the pain it causes to the individuals, but it means the recovery is delayed as well, because when demand comes back, you haven't got people there, talent has gone and so forth. So it's a very inflexible way of managing through this. And if we can keep people employed, however it's through government support or cash coming in from the businesses, then that's got to be our priority.
Okay, that's clearly a priority. Have you got other demands of the government now?
I think there are a number of consumer-friendly things they could do to stimulate, return of the travel industry demand. They could cut VAT. We'd also argue for a suspension of air passenger duty for a year. They're not collecting it at the moment because people aren't flying, but anything that can add as additional incentive to people to start flying again would be very welcome. And for small businesses, looking at business rate support schemes, as I say, direct grants and so forth, anything to help the independent SME sector come through this would be very welcome. So I think the government has a role to play. We have a role to play as an industry in, as I said earlier, giving good information to customers, getting good processes in place in destination to make this as safe and as trouble-free as possible when people want to start travelling again.
Okay, the Chancellor's due to make a speech next week revealing some of the measures to stimulate the recovery, and a cut in VAT has been widely touted. Are you getting any signal that that's something that could happen, or because some reports have suggested that it won't happen, that the Chancellor's likely to rule it out? The same with APD.
I don't know, Ian. I've written to him asking for it, impressing on the scale of the industry, the scale of the problem that the industry has, and very open to continue those discussions with Treasury. But I can't say that I've got feeling one way or the other which way he's going to go on that.
Okay. What are Abta's priorities apart from its demands of government now?
I think we have a very important role in the middle of the sort of recovery phase. I mentioned it earlier, good quality information passing from the destination to the members and from the members to the customers, I think is absolutely crucial. There is going to be a confidence issue, not just this year, but I think going into next year. And we as Abta are well positioned. We have the relationships with destinations. We can aggregate the information. We can package it and pass it on, not just to members, but directly to customers. We've had 1.2 million visits to the consumer advice part of the website on coronavirus. We've done 3,500 media interventions over this. So our role in building customer confidence, getting customers to book with professional travel organisers, Abta members, is really important. And we've got a lot of other channels, webinars and so forth, which provide training and guidance for members to help them come to terms with whatever this sort of changed future is going to be in terms of travel.
So how are you going to get that information out to members? Will they find it on the Abta website, and are you planning to target consumers with the information, perhaps through some sort of campaign?
Yeah, we have country recovery plans which are on the website, where all of the information that we receive from countries about the whether they're restrictions or local protocols or healthcare provision are there for members to access and understand, and that's kept up to date. Obviously, we've published our own post-pandemic guide as to what members can do in destination with obviously health and safety, communication with customers, risk assessment, and so forth. So there are a number of different tools for members to use. And yes, we're launching today the page on the website, which is called Restarting Travel. So abta.com/restarting travel, which is for customers to go on, get tips about how they can get comfortable with rebooking, sort of issues they should think about with the Foreign Office advice, travel insurance, speaking to Abta members and so forth. So we'll continue our direct campaign to the customers as well as the members over the coming months.
Okay, and will you be promoting this presumably through your comms team, but will there be any other marketing efforts of this service to consumers?
Well, we do. Yeah, well, certainly we produce, promoting it through our PR channels and our comms team. I think, the normal campaigning we do about travel with confidence and look for the logo, book with an Abta member, there will come a time for that where we can sort of put that message directly to the consumers. I'm not sure it's just yet where there's so much uncertainty around, but certainly at some point later in the year, I would hope to see us out there talking directly to customers and encouraging them to book.
Okay, and presumably you'll be doing your annual consumer survey.
Yes, yeah, we'll do that.
August and September. Okay. Brexit is about to re-emerge into people's consciousness, isn't it? Because we're at the point where the talks so far between the UK and the EU haven't led anywhere, and the clock's ticking down behind the scenes while we go through the pandemic. How concerned are you now about Brexit, and what can Abta do to help people with that?
I am concerned. The early text that we saw from the UK government was quite encouraging in terms of the asks that we put to government. Obviously, we want pretty much unfettered access, through transport links, the ability to move essential workers around, and reciprocal healthcare and other consumer rights. And those were included in our text. Now, of course, that's our text, which is just the starting point for then negotiation with the other side. I am concerned that the time is running out. Obviously, coronavirus has impeded the discussions, and government's attention may have been rightly on other things, but we still have that hard deadline of the 31st of December. And we've been here before in the run-up last year, where we had to do a lot of preparation for a no-deal exit. We did a lot of guidance for members. We did guidance for consumers as well, as to the sorts of things they needed to think about. And we will be dusting that off the shelves, if I can say, updating it. And unless we see significant progress over the pretty near future, we will have to start planning again for the contingency of a no-deal exit. And that, whatever one thinks politically, I think will be quite disruptive in the short term, particularly with coronavirus still being an issue by the time we get to the new year.
Yeah. And how hopeful are you that there will be some, if not some last minute fudge of the issue, or maybe an extension of the transition phase, or something? I know the government has until now ruled that out.
Well, it's clear that the rules of engagement are nothing is decided until everything is decided, which means that even if you've got strong agreement in principle in an area like tourism where both sides win, it's win-win to have tourism continuing between UK and the EU, you still won't have confirmation of that until all the other issues have been resolved, and there are a lot of those that are still a long way, I think, from agreement. So I am concerned that we may well end up, if the government maintains its current position, tipping into a situation where we leave without a deal.
Okay. I mean, in the context of COVID and the fact that we might expect the infection rate to rise with the winter and so on, is Brexit, could Brexit be the straw that broke the camel's back, or has the COVID pandemic put the concerns about Brexit in a degree of perspective? And well, how much worse can it be than a total lockdown? How would you categorize the situation businesses are going to face given these two twin challenges?
Well, I think businesses are going to need to adapt to whatever the new arrangements are after Brexit, and that will cost money. There will be new systems that are needed, new ways of working, new arrangements. And of course, if companies are already weakened because they've had a year of coronavirus standstill, that will make Brexit adjustment more difficult, I would say. So although they're quite distinct phenomena, I think it doesn't help to have them both coming together. Let's put it like that. I think Brexit will be challenging enough, even on the back of a very strong economy. I think if we're in a situation where we've still got high unemployment and low cash reserves to invest, then making that transition could be more difficult.
Okay. So can I ask you just a couple of things before we finish, Mark? The September renewals, that's going to be a difficult process for, obviously, for Abta and your members. Members are going to have difficulty getting credit guarantees and insurance and so on. So what view is Abta going to take when it comes to the requirements for the September renewals?
Well, with the March renewals, as you know, we extended the deadline March to end of April to give people more time. There's no doubt that there has been a tightening in the credit markets, and you can see why people looking at the travel industry from outside have taken a sort of short-term view that this is quite high risk. I do think, again, the advantage of opening up the market again and getting business moving isn't just that cash starts coming in. It changes the perception of the credit suppliers about the industry and its prospects for the future. It is the underlying demand for travel, I think, remains very strong. I don't think this is a sector where credit providers will say, well, no one's going to be traveling next year, so there's no point in providing bonds or insurances. Price might go up, if there's a higher risk perception or the supply of credit shrinks. So I think it will come down to a pricing issue rather than an absolute availability issue come September. Now, clearly, if there are some companies, if their balance sheets are so weak and their trading performance is very bad, they may have a struggle getting their their license renewed. But I don't see that at the moment.
Okay, good. Just quickly, you had to cancel the conference that was planned in the convention that was planned in Marrakesh, and I think you said you were planning therefore to have some sort of domestic event. What can you tell us about the plans for the convention, if indeed there'll be a convention this autumn?
I'm very confident there will be a convention, but I think it will be a virtual event. The timing of the convention is early October. I'm still not convinced by that stage, large scale sort of conglomerations of people will be acceptable, or people will be happy to do that. So we are putting in plans a virtual event which will have strong content, same kind of positioning as the travel convention, forward-looking, interesting debate, good speakers, but distributed virtually rather than in a physical venue. So it'll be new. It's new kind of territory for us. We're sort of learning about it, obviously through our webinar program, but it'll be quite different to webinars. I hope we'll have the feeling of a three-dimensional event.
Okay, and what will that be? A day, 2 days? How will you? A 2-day webinar sounds.
Yeah, we're still settling on the exact format. I think it will take place on a single day, and have, as I say, different sort of rooms within the event, if I can put it like that. But there'll be more information as we get closer to the time, for sure.
Okay, good luck with that. So you see the underlying picture for travel as being a good one, with demand, the underlying demand strong, and so on. Are you thinking now of recovery back to something like 2019 levels by when? 2022, do you think? Is that too optimistic? How do you see things panning out, briefly?
Yeah, well, I would say, I mean, from, again, anecdotally and talking to members, I don't know many who think it will bounce back next year to pre-COVID levels. So I think I'd say it's 50-50 between people who think it will take 1 more year and people who think it will take 2 more years. So if you split the difference, you're looking at 30 months, aren't you, to get back. So somewhere between 2022 and 2023, I'd say, is where the barometer is at the moment, and that's just from conversations I've had rather than any analysis I've applied to it.
Okay, a back of a fag packet barometer is.
I think 30 months is quite an accurate prediction.
Well, it's the only way to go at the moment, because who knows? Mark Tanzer, thank you so much for giving up your time today.
Thank you very much, Ian. Thank you.